Hello and welcome to episode 72 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan. I'm one of the co-founders here at ETR. I'm the father of the most beautiful beast in the world, of course, my beloved Jerry. And today, back for his second appearance of the spring/summer, it is the man who manages dozens of dynasty and high-stakes season-long teams at the same time, aka Team No Sex. It is the man you all love, Pat Kerrane. Pat, what's going on?
Hey, Adam. The key is to co-manage. Then you can squeeze in some sex on the side.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear it. I hope you guys have been enjoying Pat's articles and rankings on the site. I have found them to be legit awesome, and especially the one that he most recently wrote about zero RB and the myths and realities around it, best practices, how it's applicable to this somewhat, I think, unique year in terms of the running back market, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we're going to talk about on today's show. But before we get to that, I wanted to remind everyone that our early bird special is indeed currently running, includes our draft kit, updating now through week 1 for season-long drafts, includes our in-season package, which runs week 1 through the Super Bowl for both season-long and DFS. And you also get a $25 FFPC coupon, all for $199, by far the best deal we will have this summer. Get on the site, check it out. All of our content plans are on there as well. Of course, Kerrane's Dynasty Rankings, comments, contract status in there in all his articles, including the latest, as I mentioned, on zero RB. All right, Pat, let's get down to business here. Let's define zero RB, because I'm sure a lot of people listening to this have heard of it and they think they know what it is, but then people start talking about modified zero RB, and I've heard other people make claims that I think are wrong to the pure zero RB movement. So let's start there. What does zero RB even mean, at least to you?
Yeah, so I think the basic definition is that through the first 5 rounds of the draft, you wouldn't take any running backs, or you would take just one running back. But, like a zero running back approach this season, if you have a top 5 pick, would include taking a running back with that top 5 pick. So it's not really about avoiding running backs completely, but like a zero running back approach, let's say you're the 101, you take Christian McCaffrey, then you would be looking to avoid running backs through like the 2nd through 5th to 6th round, depending on your specific league format. But it's about trying to limit your exposure to running backs which have high bust rates, and then also try to get enough upside at running back to where you are hitting high scoring weeks at the running back position without having to devote a ton of draft capital to it.
Yeah, okay. So I like the idea in theory, at least, and we're going to get to specific this year in a second, because it's going to be super contrarian to do it this year, even more contrarian than it always is. And as you mentioned in the article, it's always pretty contrarian. People like to talk about it a lot. People don't like actually do it a lot. And so it's contrarian for sure. The biggest thing I want to mention is why it works. And there's a few reasons that I think we can talk about here. The first one is chaos in the form of both job security and injury rates. So our Josh Hermsmeyer has done work on injury rates for high workload running backs. It is significantly higher than injury rates for high workload as wide receivers, as you pointed out in the article. So just, right there, you're making a case to pick up more backup running backs, to take more of an anti-fragile approach. And then, I always bring up the same example when it comes to job security. You would never see what happened to Damian Williams last year happen to a wide receiver. Damian Williams was a 2nd, 3rd round pick. They signed LaShawn McCoy off the street. Like a week before the season starts, and all of a sudden, Damian Williams is in this massive timeshare. That would never happen to a wide receiver, where a wide receiver going the 2nd or 3rd round, they signed some old dude off the street, and next thing you know, his outlook tanks. So those are the two big things for me: job security and injury rates at the running back position are so much worse. And then as those things are happening, we pick up the benefit, because those teams who spent a lot of early draft capital on running backs are dusted, while our team is starting to make come ups. So did I describe that correctly on the anti-fragility aspect of it? Anything to add there?
Yeah, you did. The key reason why the strategy works is because of all of the chaos that the NFL has with the running back position and the high bust rates of running backs, leaving running backs available later in the draft to fill in for those running backs. What that allows you to do is to not spend a ton of draft capital on the running back position while not punting the running back position. So you're still, the goal of your running back is by the end of the season to be as strong as at running back as anyone else, maybe even stronger. You're doing that though by targeting specific running back profiles later on in the draft and gaining an advantage at the other position with the draft capital that's going to be more likely to actually hit. And so what you're trying to do is create a team that has an access to a ceiling that your league mates will not. I think that's one of the things that people, I think maybe it's counterintuitive. It's that when you're drafting like 3 running backs in the first, let's say like the first 4 or 5 rounds, you're actually generally capping your ceiling because the bust rates are so high in that range. And so what you're really doing is just kind of firing a lot of bullets at this position because you'll have like a guy or maybe 2 guys who will kind of fill in for you. But by the end of the year, you're not going to have the ceiling that a guy who is got stud wide receivers that he took early in those rounds and managed to find breakout running backs later on.
Yeah, and I think the timing of it is a key consideration, right? Like you're going to be weakest at running back in week 1, and hopefully by week 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, when all the money is made in season-long fantasy, your running back position is really strong. Now, there's some best ball leagues where week 1 counts as much as week 16, and then it's not as effective, I would say. Is that fair to say? You want to be using zero RB in leagues where you want to be peaking later in the year.
That is one of the advantages. I think the best ball win rates, like Sean Siegel's looked a lot at the best ball win rates for, going running back heavy versus, taking a modified zero running back approach or a true zero running back approach. And the win rates are pretty good there too. I think you kind of have to do it a little bit differently in best ball. You generally need to take your running backs a little earlier. Like you don't want to be like taking total flyer guys. You kind of want to have most of your running back picks in by like round 12 or so. But it's not something that I would say is limited to managed leagues. I think it is particularly effective in high stakes formats that have like really top heavy payout structures because you are trying to get this massive, like just dominant team at the end, just a juggernaut. But most best ball leagues, it's like a winner take all best ball structure or really top heavy best ball payout structure, then it's a fairly decent strategy there too. If it's like a double up best ball, maybe not.
Right. You mentioned this year the top 5, and one thing that I've talked about already is like I think it's a huge advantage this year to be drafting in the top 3, and you can make an argument that it's an advantage to be drafting in the top 5. But to me, there's so few true workhorse running backs anymore. All these guys are getting pushed up. You can poke holes in Joe Mixon or Nick Chubb or Miles Sanders or whatever, but you can't poke holes in the workload of CMC and Zeke and Barkley. So I think, as Pat said, I would not pass on those guys, even if you wanted to execute a zero RB. But overall, it's going to be contrarian to go even modified zero RB because, as I talked about with Evan on the pod that we released on Thursday, there's an incredible amount of running backs going in the first few rounds, more than I can ever remember. So even more than usual, this will be a contrarian strategy, and I think that immediately gives you some plus EV, especially as Pat alluded to in these large field tournaments. So yeah, I think being contrarian is at least part of it, right, Pat?
That is part of it, yeah. And I think this year really lends itself to that because last year running back ADP was pretty aggressive, and it worked. It was a good year to draft running backs early. Running backs stayed really healthy through rounds like 3 through 6 when those types of running backs are really the ones who are most exposed because they tend to get these really high level in terms of volume workloads, but not actually all that valuable workloads. A lot of the guys in that range tend not to be as much of pass catchers, and they're getting a lot of these kind of lower value carries. Ben Gretsch talks about this trap stat. You don't really want guys who are getting loaded up with carries that aren't inside the 10-yard line. So those running backs have really high injury rates, but last year a lot of them stayed healthy. And I think what we're seeing this year is that drafters are even more aggressive with those running back ADPs than they were last year, taking the lesson that, last year was the right way to draft.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, last year was a historically bad year for zero RB for some of the reasons that Pat mentioned. I think there also weren't um, nearly as many injuries as you mentioned. I think a question people often ask is, well, a huge key component of this strategy is I need to be winning on the waiver wire, right? Like, let's say for whatever reason I didn't get the right backups or the right handcuff type guys on my roster. When someone goes down, I need to win on the waiver wire. But what if I'm in a league where everybody is incredibly active, everybody's extremely aggressive on running backs on the waiver wire? Can I still execute this strategy if I'm going to have heavy competition on the waiver wire to get those running backs when they pop up?
Yeah, I think it's important to consider your waiver wire and sort of your league settings in terms of how many bench spots you have. Do you have fab? Like, are you going to be able to aggressively go after a guy who becomes available, or are you just kind of sitting in the waiver priority? But I've been using zero running back strategies or modified versions of it in FFPC for a number of years, and you can get those waiver wire pickups like more easily than you'd think. Even people grind the waivers in those leagues, the high stakes format. It's not because you have fab, you can get access to some of those pickups, and because you might be looking for different things than your league mates because you've structured your team to be really, really strong at wide receiver, and potentially in that format, which is a tight end premium format, it can also be a good strategy to take a tight end early, get one of those guys like Leone was talking about that have the big advantage, like Travis Kelce. Then you're maybe not chasing the tight end guys, you're not chasing the wide receivers, and so you're actually, especially in those early weeks, looking at different pickups than your league mates because you have different priorities.
So I think format matters here, as we've kind of been alluding to. If you could drop a perfect format to try to implement zero RB, what do you think it would be?
I think the perfect format would be PPR. That's important because we talked about like why wide receiver or why zero running back wasn't really that effective last year. The other reason was that elite wide receiver scoring was down. And I think that's mostly a blip. Like, you had a lot of injuries. You had, like, Juju just got tanked by Roethlisberger's injury. And so we are, with zero running back this year, betting on the elite wide receiver scoring to bounce back. And so you don't necessarily need it to be PPR, like 0.5 PPR. You can kind of use some zero running back principles too, but definitely prefer a PPR league for the strategy because you are trying to load up at wide receiver. You actually, I think with zero running back, it's better to have at least 2 running back starters because you want that running back ADP to be pretty aggressive so that you have a chance to load up at wide receivers in those like rounds, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then you want to be able, I would say, to start at least like 4 wide receivers. So ideally, maybe it's a 2 running back, 3 wide receivers, 2 flex. But I think, the FFPC format, while not ideal, that's 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 2 flex, tight end, quarterback, and it's tight end premium. That's still fine. You have to be a little bit more strategic in terms of when you're taking your running backs, and you have to be a little bit more aggressive with making sure you have enough capital in that position. But yeah, it's not like just limited to that perfect, 2 running back, 3 wide receiver, 2 flex type of setup.
Okay. The $1 million question for this year is this year different, right? With so few teams using bell cow backs, as I mentioned, does that mean that our pickings, if we wait until the 6th, 7th round and how aggressive people are taking running backs, the pickings are even slimmer this year than usual, and that makes it harder to execute this? Or is it just better that there's so many running backs going early for this strategy this year?
Yeah, I think we want the running backs with projectable but not particularly valuable workloads to be going as early as possible. And they are. They're going really, really early. Like Leonard Fournette, for example, who I just don't see how he accesses a league-winning ceiling, given that he had the workload to do that last year and couldn't get there, and his workload's going to be scaled back. Like, he's going in the 3rd round. You've got guys like, Todd Gurley, Melvin Gordon going right in that range. I think they're certainly going to get a lot of volume if they stay healthy, but they don't have league winning ceiling. So having those guys going in the third round, letting us take wide receivers there, pushing down wide receivers, that are like Evans, like tier 2 wide receivers, you can get a couple of those in round 4, sometimes even round 5. I mean, it's pretty wild. And then, if you like in the FFPC, for example, I think it is a big advantage to have a top, 3 pick, especially, and get one of those stud running backs. And that allows you a lot of flexibility from that point on. If you don't have that pick, maybe you do want to wade in and get one running back in those top 5 rounds or so. Like a James Conner is pretty interesting because I think he does have access to a ceiling. You could try to like reach for a guy. Miles Sanders ADP is getting a little out of control there. He's like, I think he's going like top 5 in recent drafts because of the Dalvin Cook thing. But Kenya Drake's a little interesting. You kind of chase the elite running back profile that way, or you can go in around like round 4 or 5 and try to get one of these rookies like a Cam Akers, who could be a lead back with a lot of receiving work. So there's different ways to kind of modify it for the format and still make sure that you have access to like an early running back with a high ceiling.
My argument against, and the argument that everybody is going to give you against this strategy, is they're going to say, Pat, I can get Adam Thielen in the 4th round. I can get Calvin Ridley in the 5th round. I can get Will Fuller in the 7th round. Why the hell do I need to spend a 2nd round pick on Chris Godwin? I don't think the difference between Chris Godwin and Adam Thielen or Calvin Ridley is that great. Whereas the difference between the running back I get in the 2nd round versus the running back I get in the 6th round is going to be massive. So to me, that is the chalk argument against. How do you refute that?
Yeah, I think people underestimate how many wide receivers they actually need. You want to be dominating every single starting lineup position, and so like the fact that you can get Calvin Ridley in round 4 is not a reason to also not have Chris Godwin on your team. You can start both of them. I think the other thing that people consistently overvalue is the accuracy of preseason running back projections, and just projections in general. But running back projections in the preseason are much harder to get right because of everything we talked about before. And so that difference between the round 3 running back and the round 6 running back, round 7 running back is not as big as it feels like heading into the season. Whereas wide receiver kind of consistently always feels deep. But I think that especially in managed leagues, getting access to a Chris Godwin, who's number 2 in points per game last year, you get that elite ceiling where there's not a ton of guys. There's guys who you can feel pretty comfortable starting at wide receiver, but the guys who consistently deliver those really high-end wide receiver, like week-changing weeks, are usually available in the early rounds, and they dry up pretty quickly. So if you have, in this year, it's like you can get maybe 4 of those guys because of the way the running back ADPs are. Well, if you can start all 4 of them every week, you're going to have a huge advantage of your league mates, assuming that you can fill in running back in the back end with breakout guys.
Yeah. For the record, it pains me to say it because everybody knows me as a Chris Godwin truther, but I'm actually out on Chris Godwin at a 2nd round ADP, but that's a topic for another day. Okay. I want to run through some specific names. Pat is going to be releasing some guys to target if you're executing this strategy in his articles on the site. I just wanted to run through a few of them quickly so people get an idea for the types of players we're looking for if we execute this strategy. So give the people some idea the kind of attributes, the kind of players that you're looking for when we're executing a 0 RB strategy.
Yeah, there's been a lot of good work on this. JJ Zacharyson had a good article recently looking at the type of breakout profiles we want. Sean Siegel's done a ton of awesome work on it. But basically, you want to have pass catchers. That's the biggest thing, is to look at guys who have access to a receiving workload. Ideally, we'd also like access to some of those carries inside the 10-yard line for touchdown upside. Like LeGarrette Blount was a massive 0 running back hit in the year where he led the league in touchdowns. And so that's something we can look at, although it's a little bit I think the receiving is what we want to prioritize there. This is a big point in JJ's articles, that you want to target guys with ambiguous backfields. So we're not necessarily looking for like the pure handcuff types. We actually would prefer guys who have some standalone value that can start for you in week 1 and then might emerge as the season goes on, and might not even need injuries. So we're kind of betting more on the projection error side of this than injuries, although injuries do happen and can help teams that have loaded up on some of the running backs later on in the draft. I think another thing that we prefer to have is that our running backs be on the younger side and that they be athletic. If you have someone who is just dominating receiving workload, then I'm not as concerned with athleticism, but athleticism can be quite helpful with guys who have small workloads, because they can deliver big fantasy points on small workloads and then also convince the coaches to give them more work as the season goes on. And then the other thing to pay attention to is guys who have contingent value, guys who are going to see a substantial role increase if the starter ahead of them gets hurt. So basically the true handcuff guys. But, ideally, the breakout profile that we're looking for has standalone value right away. And on top of that, would have even more value if there were to be an injury to one of their backfield mates.
Yeah, I think people make the mistake of assuming that 0 RB means you're going to take Tony Pollard and Chase Edmonds and these guys who are drawing pretty thin to give you any startable value unless there's an injury in front of them, right? To me, a perfect example of what you're talking about is a guy like Kareem Hunt, who, had 44 targets in 8 games last year. And if Nick Chubb were to get hurt, Kareem Hunt would have an absolutely massive role, and he can help you right out of the gate, right? The problem is Kareem Hunt's going in like the 6th round or so, which isn't great. It's not terrible, but it's not great either. But to me, his like profile fits really well, right?
Yeah, Kareem Hunt's exactly the type of profile. He's also he has a 295 PPR point season under his belt, so we've seen him do it. Last year he had 76% of the receiving work once he got back from suspension, which was more than Le'Veon Bell, more than Tariq Cohen. So he's, he fits that receiving profile really, really well. We know he can be really productive if there's an injury ahead of him, and he's immediately startable. So he's someone, and I also think he's, he kind of fits the 0 running back profile because he's not fun to draft. He's just someone who you kind of know that he's not going to be this awesome starter on his actual team, but he is someone that you're going to be comfortable starting week 1, and it's pretty obvious to see how he gets to a top 5 running back type of season. It's basically Chubb goes down and he's the guy.
I don't want to go through all the running backs that are going to be in your articles. We'll save some of that for the people on the site, but there's a couple here that I wanted to mention because I think they're interesting. You noted Antonio Gibson, current ADP around 119 in FFPC, number 66 overall pick in this year's draft. The thing about Antonio Gibson that's interesting to me is obviously highly athletic, but the Redskins are absolutely stacked at the running back position. If for them, they're not stacked anywhere, but for them, Adrian Peterson, Geis, Bryce Love, Peyton Barber, J.D. McKissic. But at wide receiver, where I think even though they announced Gibson as a running back, they said he's going to contribute, he's going to play running back. They should be using him more as a wide receiver, where only like Kelvin Harmon, Steven Sims, Trey Quinn are behind Terry McLaurin. So I think Gibson having running back eligibility fits in the 0 RB kind of mold where he could get a lot of targets too. I know you liked him in the pre-draft process as well. So yeah, that one makes sense to me also. And it seems like a lot of rookies end up in the 0 RB targets also, right?
Yes, a lot of rookies do end up as targets. I think particularly this time of year when their ADPs are a little bit too low. In FFPC last year, by the time we got into August and September, Justice Hill was like a 7th round pick and Darwin Thompson was all priced up. So some of the rookie value will get sucked out. And I would say it's probably better to get access or to get exposure to some of these rookies now if you're doing like football guys drafts and stuff, because they're probably gonna be a lot more expensive once, guys like me start writing about them and stuff. So, but I think, Antonio Gibson really fits like everything we're looking for. because of that athleticism and because he's going to get on the field as a pass catcher. And then the guys ahead of him are not guys that anyone is excited about. No one's drafting Darius Guice with really any excitement, just the fact that you can project him, you can pencil him in for a decent amount of volume. That's a guy that we're looking to fade anyway in zero running back. So we're directly fading him by taking the pass catcher behind him. Adrian Peterson is really old. Bryce Love, who knows what's going to happen with his health. Peyton Barber is someone I was all over Ronald Jones last year, partially because I don't believe in Peyton Barber whatsoever. I don't know if McKissick will make the team. So you're taking a guy in Gibson who, if you're making projections, it's very hard to project him for anything really usable. But when you just look at the situation, a lot of it's just really cover for his ADP. He reminds me a lot of Alvin Kamara when he came in as a rookie, who actually also had Adrian Peterson ahead of him. And it was like hard to see how he was going to be doing anything, but he got on the field as a pass catcher right away. I think Gibson could have like a season that pays off on his ADP in a huge way, and he doesn't need an injury to do it. That's why I like him a lot. Some of the guys in that range, once you get down, into the round 10 range or so, they really need like an injury, like you mentioned with Tony Pollard. Like Pollard's not paying off without an injury to Zeke, and Gibson can get there just by outplaying guys.
I wanted to mention another rookie who is a zero RB candidate in Zach Moss, and he doesn't fit the profile as a pass catcher per se, but the Bills have said they have a very specific need or a desire for goal line, short yardage stuff. And I mean, Frank Gore got 10.1 carries per game last year, and that was even though they pretty much like stripped him of his role at the end of the year. Still averaged 10 carries a game for the whole year. Devin Singletary is only 5'7", 203. Zach Moss comes in at 223 pounds. I think that this is kind of what you were talking about with LeGarrette Blount, where you can see him change of pace, short yardage, scoring touchdowns. Obviously, we think Josh Allen's going to steal a number of short yardage touchdowns from the running backs as well. But I think I'm definitely higher than market on Zach Moss, regardless of if I'm executing zero RB or not.
Yeah, Zach Moss has access to that goal line work. Frank Gore, he had 18 green zone carries, those carries inside the 10. 18 of those last year. The rest of the team combined for 4. So I think Moss can get a big percentage of those looking at his profile. I also think he could be a little bit of a receiver. Gore had just 13 receptions. Yeldon, though, also had 13. So there's some kind of non-Singletary receiving work that he could soak up. I don't think Singletary will get all of that. And Moss is decent as a receiver. It's not like he can't do that. So Singletary is definitely going to block Moss from, Moss becoming a space back or anything, because Singletary, I think, is good, and Singletary is particularly good in the receiving game. The problem is that most of the time the space back is the cheaper of the two running backs in a two-man committee. And in this case, it's flipped, and it's really flipped. So Singletary is going pretty early, and Moss is one of the later zero running backs that we can get that's not just a handcuff type. So I think probably underrated in terms of his ability to catch passes. Like, I think he could, have 1 to 2 receptions per game, which is pretty solid if you're also getting a lot of goal line carries. And his price is pretty appetizing.
Yeah. Guys with standalone value who, as you said, have contingency. If Devin Singletary were to get hurt, Zach Moss would be extremely, extremely startable. I would be remiss if I let you get out of here without talking about the Tampa Bay Bucs backfield, because there is your boy Ronald Jones is going at almost the exact same ADP now, I think, as Keyshawn Vaughn. I see 84.1. By the way, we do have all the FFPC ADPs up on the site. Ronald Jones, 84.1. Keyshawn Vaughn, 83.5 in ADP. There were rumors that they asked Bruce Arians about Devontae Freeman, and he said, well, he's just too expensive. But it didn't sound that he could have said we're happy with Ronald and Keyshawn. Instead, he said, well, Devontae Freeman's too expensive. I don't know if you caught that. I don't know if that means anything. But anyways, I assume you're still on your boy Ronald Jones at this point as a zero RB candidate.
I kind of am, but like my thing with Ronald Jones is I have just an insane amount of exposure to him in Dynasty. And for once, he's actually like priced pretty fairly. Normally, I'm used to, Ronald Jones last year in September was going like round 14 and stuff. So I'm used to getting him for free. I don't like that I have to pay for him now. And I actually think that Keyshawn Vaughn is probably the one whose ADP is going to climb substantially. And I think Jones' ADP will probably drop. So at the moment, I've actually been getting a little bit of exposure to Vaughn, which, Pete Overzet is calling me out on Twitter because on our podcast where I'm constantly talking about how much I like Jones. But I think that Vaughn is someone that does make sense to have some exposure to in redraft, partly because he's so overpriced in Dynasty. It's nice to get a little exposure in redraft, and it's nice to do it, I think, now, because this is the time where his ADP is going to be at least somewhat acceptable. And it's going to be, I could see him in the 5th round easily in another month or so. And Jones, I think, will drop. I mean, Jones is a guy that the fantasy community, high stakes community in particular, has never been bullish on. And I think right now he's actually kind of suffering from that projectability where if, the news starts to move in Vaughn's favor over the next month or so, then I think people will just be out on Jones as, the way they always have been in the past.
Yeah. Okay. Had to let you get that in. I can't believe you're wavering on taking him now. That was I saw Pete called you out on Twitter for taking Keyshawn ahead of Ronald. Not good.
That was a co-managed team. I am co-managing that with my brother. So, there's various interests.
All right. There are tons more zero RB candidates and targets that Pat is going to talk about on the site in his zero RB series. For now, you can go check out his article, his Dynasty Rankings, et cetera, on the site. Tell the people where they can find you, Pat.
Yeah. At Pat Kerrane on Twitter. And we'll be doing, me and Pete Overzet will be bringing back our high stakes podcast at some point. Name potentially changing and launch date TBD, but we'll look for that too.
Okay. Lots up in the air in the very crucial Chasing the Chip, formerly known as Chasing the Chip, right? That's what it was called?
Ship chasing.
Ship chasing. I butchered that. I apologize. Okay. We set it all on zero RB. For Pat, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.